first of all, we touched on this a little and a few times, but there are staggering statistics that anywhere from 70 to 75% of venture-backed startups ultimately fail. I'm curious, where were you when you learned about this failure rate, and what were your thoughts on it?
I think the first statistic you learn as an entrepreneur, because it's sort of a badge of pride and it's also a way to hedge the emotional risk you're about to take, is that 90% of startups fail. And I think like 80% of them fail within the first 18 months, first year and a half. So if you make it that long, you're meant to feel like you're special or you're doing a good job or something like that. And if you fail, you're meant to feel as though that's normal or that was the expected outcome. So I definitely learned about that quite early. I think it was much later that I learned that even venture-backed startups fail at an alarming rate. And I think it's just a really important lesson because so many founders, yours truly being high on the list. I listened to a podcast recently that talked about dark energy motivation and light energy motivation. Dark energy motivation is running from something. Light energy motivation is running to something. Dark energy motivation is fear, insecurity, uncertainty. Light energy motivation is passion, love, beauty. And most founders, or at least I'll speak for myself, start with a disproportionate amount of dark energy. So I'm fearful that I'm going to fail. I'm so worried about what other people think. I don't want everyone to think that I'm a hack or a fraud or a loser. So you're so desperate to prove yourself. You're running from failure, not necessarily running to passion for your project. And that's what got me out of bed at 5 a.m. every day for the first couple of years, is just fear of failure, really. And I think along the way, it's like you're drowning constantly. And so you're looking for something to rescue you. And there's this thought that I certainly had, and a lot of other founders I spoke to have, that getting money is not only validation because a venture capitalist has anointed you and said that you're on the right path, but it feels like relief, and it feels like a victory. It feels like, oh, okay, like I have a lot of money in the bank, like I'm safe now. And as per your statistic, like that's simply just not the case. And in fact, a lot of times taking on money before you're ready is a way to kill yourself faster, not slower.
Why is that?
I think I've given this analogy before, but I like the golf analogy because I've played golf 5 times in my life and I'm miserable at it. When you play golf, particularly if you're bad, you wanna smack the ball. You want the satisfaction of really sending it flying. So hitting the ball with a driver, the most powerful club, is what you want to do. If you just sit on the putting green and sit with a little baby putter and hit the ball, it's not very satisfying. But if you are a little bit off, if you're a couple of degrees off or your form isn't quite right, you miss the hole by a couple feet with the putter, But if you are a couple of degrees off with the driver, because you're hitting the ball with such force and it's going so far, you can end up 172 yards in the wrong direction in the woods in poison ivy. And so taking on money is sort of like having a driver in your hands while you're still not very good at golf. Like you have a lot of power. Instead of spending $500 a month on Facebook ads, it's $10,000. Instead of hiring one person who's working below market rate and for equity and really believes, you can hire 6 people at market rate. Any decision you make with a lot more confidence and with a lot more power. And as a function of that, any mistake you make is magnified. So I think that's why startups that take on too much money too soon fail, because they haven't fully worked out the kinks yet. And so any little mistake is magnified quite tremendously.
Something you've touched on in a previous session is how people are often kind of searching for the headline that they can tell their friends and family about, and saying that you raised money from venture capital is certainly one of those things. I'm just curious what the pitfalls are there, and if there is a different kind of benchmark that people should strive for instead.
Yeah, I think this is I just started working with a personal trainer who's really big on functional strength, not necessarily being able to say, I benched this much or I passed this test or whatever. So many of those tests, either little hacks or ways to, we were talking about CrossFit and sort of a niche analogy, but the way people in CrossFit do pull-ups is they kip, which is sort of using momentum to get up as opposed to just using pure strength. And it's like, why are you doing that? Like, to what end exactly? Like, just so you can say you can do more pull-ups? Like, you're not actually getting any stronger or any better. You're just sort of hacking the system to prove something to someone. And we do this a lot as humans. We want the trophy, and we don't care so much about what we actually have gained from the experience. So yeah, I think founders, there's a lot of pressure that you get from, ironically, like people that love and support you, right? These are the people that ask quite frequently. Like in the beginning, my family or my friends, great support network would be like, how's it going? What's the latest? What's going on with the company? And you feel obliged to have some sort of an update that isn't pathetic. And the big ones are like, great, we have this many employees now. Great, we just raised money. Great, I just got into an incubator. Great, I just signed this big client. Like, those are the headlines that you think people want to think or hear. And you asked, like, what should you focus on instead? And the answer is functional strength, is like, business fundamentals, things that are less sexy, but are laying a very important foundation for what later will, delaying gratification, delaying validation, like doing it, really finding joy and beauty in doing things slowly and doing them the right way, focusing on lifetime value, focusing on your email sequences that you send to customers and like getting the copy just right and the open rates better. And like, these are things that won't have any splashy result other than building a really impressive and solid foundation on top of which you can build your kingdom. So I think you really have to get into the mindset, like ideally you just stop caring what other people think and you just build it the way it's meant to be built. And I think that's probably the best way to win. But if you can't turn off the I need to impress other people instinct, I think you have to play these mind games of like, just think about how big and impressive it will be later. Like, let me play for the conversation I'm going to have with my parents in 5 years and how satisfying that's going to be, and not worry about the one in 5 days. So at the very least, like Gary Vaynerchuk says, he who holds his breath the longest wins. Like, how can you stay underwater longer and longer and hold your breath and put off these little gasps of validation and delay the gratification that you so desire, and learn to sort of subdue and a new agey expression is sit in the uncomfortability, like just sort of learn how to be zen in a state of chaos.
Something else we've touched on in the past that you brought up a few times is this idea that there are no silver bullets, only lead ones. And I'm curious your thoughts on why people think that, raising capital from venture capital is a silver bullet, and what you would want them to do to kind of reframe that mentality.
I think people think, and I say this without judgment, I certainly did many times. My idea, my thing, my product is perfect. The only problem is people don't know about it. How do I get people to know about it? Well, I need money to advertise or to hire salespeople, or that's the problem, is that it's just not out there enough. And so money will fix my problem. There was a TED Talk. It's a very short one, but he basically goes through like 100 companies that he had access to, this gentleman, and graded them all subjectively on various scales. How good was their timing? How good was their team? How good was their idea? How good was their funding? A whole bunch of things. And then looked at the correlations between success and the grades that he gave them. And money was actually in last place for how much it predicted success. Timing was in first place. Like, is your idea well timed with trends and with market dynamics? Team was high on the list, and so on. So yeah, I think people think that it's really uncomfortable to like have to admit to yourself that your product isn't quite as good as you thought, or that you're not targeting quite the right customer, or that your team isn't the right team, or these are really humbling, frustrating things that you have to toil with. And it's a lot easier just to be like, oh, it's because I don't have money, that's why we're not blowing up yet. And if I just had money, if I was just lucky like that girl who just raised $2 million, fuck her. If I was like her, we'd be succeeding. And it's just not statistically the case. I not to get political, but I think a lot of people do this with money in their personal life. Like, if I weren't in debt, or if I were wealthy, or if I won the lottery, and then you look at lottery winners and they're not any happier than Gen Pop. They're not any happier than the average person once you win the Mega Millions, right? Jim Carrey has a quote, I wish that everyone were to be rich and famous, or were to become rich and famous, just so they can see how unimportant it is. So I think we as humans think that money will solve all of our problems. And the reality is, unless you're below the poverty line, it doesn't. And I think startups think that money will solve all their problems, but unless you have $0 in the bank, and like most of your day is just spent worrying about keeping the lights on. Like, if you have $50,000 in the bank, adding 500,000 more isn't going to fix your problems.